All right, this nightclub venue we're in is perfect for a panel, so we're all super excited to be here. This panel is called Launching Sooner. My name's Matt Bornstein. I'm a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, focused on AI investing. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a controversial claim. So the topic is moving LLM apps into production. My claim is that actually nobody knows how to do this yet. We know how to deploy web apps. We know how to deploy traditional machine learning systems. But when it comes to LLMs, actually we're all kind of making it up as it go. Luckily, we have 3 experts with us here today to help us figure this out. So I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Aparna.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name's Aparna, one of the founders at Arize. Arize is the leading ML observability platform, LLM observability platform.
Awesome. Hey, I'm Ankush. I'm co-founder of LangChain. LangChain is a company that's formed around the open source software framework that makes it easy to develop LLM applications.
Hey, and I'm Lee. I'm the VP of Developer Experience at Vercel. Vercel is a front-end cloud, helps you build and deploy your AI apps.
Great. You know what, I'm going to move.
Come in close.
We're all friends here, so, you know, and it includes you. It's not just us, so we're just getting a little friendlier. Lee, maybe we'll start with you. So Vercel is one of the main platforms people deploy AI apps to today. Presumably you see a lot of what's going on, what some of the design patterns are, where people stub their toes, things like that. Can you just tell us a little bit what you've seen so far? You know, what kind of best practices are that you've seen on the Vercel platform for this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really fortunate to get to talk to a lot of really awesome AI builders, early stage startups, and some of our larger customers as well too, just building AI apps and get to learn what's working well for them, what they're interested in the space, and kind of how they're deploying these applications at scale. And I think there's a couple different categories of apps that I feel like we're seeing for the kind of hobbyist individual builders. For example, a person on my team, Hassan, built this app called Room GPT, and you upload a photo of your room and it spits out this like amazing redesigned version of your room. And it seems like a simple idea. This is probably the smallest micro AI app, but it's been used over 1 million times. So there's just all sorts of this broad spectrum of really small AI apps that are building cool things, building off this technology. Then like a level up is just the wave of amazing startups we're seeing right now built on LLMs and brand new technology. For example, one customer of ours, Jenny, which is an AI service, they really help you write research papers really easily. So AI in this sense, an AI app is really deeply embedded into the product. So not only do you have chat completion, but they can also like automatically cite resources from academic papers. And also, of course, really large companies too. So I think it boils down to really like 2 patterns and where we're helping out AI companies. The first is that we're giving them the infrastructure to build and scale their AI workloads. For example, maybe that's a chat-like interface where you need to stream back some response from an LLM or search and retrieve something from your vector database. And the second is the actual like tools and frameworks that developers are building with, which for us is a React framework called Next.js that we build to help you build really great production quality UIs. And then we also have an AI SDK that helps you build out some of the patterns I talked about, like the AI chat interfaces. So I guess in general, we're seeing just a ton of innovation in the AI space. It's been super fun to watch, and yeah, it's been great.
What do you think? Do people know what they're doing? Do they know how to deploy these apps, or is it all over the map?
I would say some, but there's still a lot of people figuring it out. And I think in a good way, because the definition of what an AI app is evolving really quickly. Every new day, there's some new tool that gets thrown into an internal Slack channel or on Hacker News or somewhere. It's just like mind blowing. So I think the redefinition of that is also changing as well too.
Well, that's a very nice answer. So that's good. I'm glad you did that. So Ankush, LangChain obviously is one of the most popular frameworks or ways people develop apps using LLMs now. Are you seeing people go into production? How do they do it? What's sort of best practices?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, we do see a lot of people prototyping with LangChain and then taking the applications or prototypes that they built and shipping them to production. Quite literally how they're doing it is we see a lot of people who are using the Python library, use like Fast API or Flask or Django, use like, serverless environments primarily. We also offer like a JavaScript a library as well, and so a lot of people are using Vercel. Shout out Vercel. A lot of people are using Pinecone for their vector databases. So that's quite literally like what tools people are using to deploy their applications. In terms of like what are people deploying, the most successful apps that I think we've seen are not necessarily the agentic applications, but like the more I don't want to say straightforward, but like I guess like simpler sort of chat over your docs type of applications. So yeah, I would say mostly like chat over your docs using a variety of tools depending on like which version of LangChain you're using.
And there's this question around how much LangChain people need once they go into production, meaning in dev mode, you want a million integrations because you don't know what you're going to need and you want to try everything, versus once you're in production, you probably need only a handful of those, of the actual kind of library or framework that LangChain provides. I guess, do you agree or disagree with that? And is there a strategy for people to kind of make that switch?
Totally. I think this comes down to like customizability. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback on how, it's fairly straightforward to like build a prototype in LangChain because we offer a lot of integrations and a lot of off-the-shelf chains that you can use like just by importing them. But in production, you want to integrate with your own data, maybe use your own prompts. And so just exposing that more, even in our pre-built chains, is something that we're moving towards to make it easier to customize. Because I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to flipping the switch from prototyping to production.
Awesome. And so Aparna, you've, as the co-founder of Arize, you've seen a lot of traditional machine learning workloads going to production and now sort of newer foundation model based apps. What have you learned from that? Do you think there are lessons that sort of carry over from one to the other? Is it the same problem now people are confronting, or is it actually a different set of problems?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that there's actually a lot more similarities than differences that I think you'd see. I mean, fundamentally, you're deploying models into production. You need to know how's it doing in production. You need to be able to look and analyze performance. So how do you evaluate these models is really important. We're at a vector database conference, embeddings, something that a lot of observability for machine learning, traditional 1.0 type of machine learning applications have needed, looking at the embeddings, using that to troubleshoot. That's clearly very important, even in this new space. And lastly, I'd say that the collection of data to be able to go back, to go rebuild, or in this space, we're calling it fine tune or improve. That's a pretty common pattern that existed in ML 1.0 and is also carrying over. And the nuances might be different. So performance and evaluation for LLMs could be vastly different. The metrics that we're looking at, it may not be things like F1 score or things like that, or AUC. It might be a lot specific around how do you evaluate generation. And there's things like the LLM assisted evaluation metrics that's becoming really popular. So what's the nuance around how do you evaluate is going to be different for this new category, but fundamentally, where's the model doing well? Where's it not doing well? You need to be able to, you're deploying AI into production. You need to know these questions. You need to be able to answer that and understand what segments is it doing well on, where is it not? And so that part still remains really, really important. Embeddings, which has been foundational architecture's core, even in this new space. And how do you then go collect all of this information and use it to go, it could be fine-tuned for LLMs. For the image space, it was figuring out what to go label and what to go collect. But there's these fundamental workflows that I think are core across 1.0 and 2.0, and the nuances are where we start to differ.
So are we 2.0 right now? My version control system is starting to break.
I think so. I think that we'll dig into it, but one of the hot takes I think we're coming into it with is the world of 2.0 LLM applications into production. I see a lot of our own customers trying to get LLMs into production, and it's early. It's really early. The stuff that I'm seeing is like you were saying, Ankush, it's a lot more simpler. It's simple search and retrieval systems. So what Pinecone's right in the thick of, that's a lot more what's common than agentic, call an agent, calls another agent, goes and reads from your database. Like we're still, I'd say what's real for production next year versus couple years is big gap.
So what Aparna's referring to is someone on the panel here, I won't reveal who, but someone on the panel sort of made this statement earlier this morning that most AI Twitter demos will never make it into production. And it's not a value judgment, it's not sort of a good or a bad thing, but it's sort of an interesting idea to explore. So maybe let's talk about that. And no one has to identify themselves, but I guess the thinking is, if I've just put together a really cool demo, a really cool app, I've launched it on Twitter, I've gotten thousands of users, likes, bookmarks, etc. Like, how do I know if I have something really good on my hands that I should be kind of scaling up, raising money, doing all this stuff? And assuming I do, what are the tips you would give someone, kind of a next step?
Yeah, I think it's really important. Something that Aparna mentioned earlier, evaluation. It's hard to talk about deploying things to production without talking about evaluation. So I think at every step of the way, you need to have some evals that give you confidence in your outputs, right? I think a combination of model-assisted evals and just straight-up user feedback is super useful. So when you're first getting an application off the ground, it's important to just get it working for a few inputs reliably. The next step, is maybe a more staging version of your application where you have a few more users. Things can go quite wrong at that stage.
What are some of the worst ways you guys have seen things go wrong? Say sort of staging or launching a prod too soon?
Not even staging. When I'm using just some simple agents with 2 or 3 tools, they can get stuck in a loop, and just if you don't have limits on how many LLM calls or how many the max iterations for the agent, things can go on forever.
I think the other one we commonly see is so much of this space, you're not training the base model. It's all about what can you put. Most people aren't training the base model. A lot of it is what can you actually put into the prompt. And so if you're using vector search and retrieval, was the context that you retrieved actually right? Is there too much context that it actually doesn't even use that in the response? Does it there's actually a lot even in that workflow that's important to troubleshoot and important to make sure, did the retrieval go well or is it the model?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Doing evals for a base model is hard enough. Doing evals with tools, retrieval, chain of thought, any type of recursive prompting is even harder. Do you guys have any favorite sets of evals you like to use, or resources or approaches? Because this is such an important step for people to do. What sort of stuff would you suggest to people?
I don't have super strong opinions on exactly how to do it, but at a high level, it's important to have an evolving set of test cases, potentially for multiple steps of your application. And I think this should be an ongoing process where maybe you start off with an initial set of test cases, and then you launch your application to a few users. And then you have some channel to collect user feedback and also, do model-assisted evals for a portion of your outputs. And then you take the really good ones and you add them to a data set. And then you use that for either, you can use that to improve your application or use that to test further iterations of your application. So yeah, I think I've heard that as a pretty common developer workflow that people are moving towards.
And if I have 80 developer hours in a week, or however you break it down, how much of that do you think I should be spending on evals, testing, monitoring versus new development? Obviously, this changes as the product gets more mature, but like just to give people a rough gut check, like, am I doing enough on evaluation?
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think during the actual building process, I think they go evaluating and building kind of go hand in hand. You're kind of iteratively, like Ankush was saying, I see people generating test sets, consistently looking at things like, and this is actually a great spot for LLM assisted evals because you're not going to have true user feedback until you roll out into production. You may get some test data that you build out. This is actually a great spot I've been seeing for agents, like a really good use case we've been talking about. And so I think it's a lot more, maybe it's 60-40 or like, but I think it's kind of similar to like that data scientist building a model type of workflow where you're building, you're evaluating, it's just part of the loop. I think that it's similar in this space. As it goes into deployment and as it goes into production, I think it's important to, again, when I mean evals, I don't just mean the model's output and the model evals. I'm also talking about the evals around search and retrieval. It could be the evals around how do you look at things like, from an agentic workflow, if you're using that, how do you look at evals across that? How do you evaluate your prompt templates and consistently measure that is I think also an important part of the broader what does evals look like. And so once you go into production, I think most teams typically are using or starting to think about it's so dependent on your use case. But if you're using, back to kind of Lee, your point of if it's more chatbot based and you're able to collect user feedback, incorporating that into your evaluation is really important.
So testing a prompt 5 times and then YOLOing is not the right strategy, you're saying?
I would say no.
I mean, that's how I do all of my projects. Maybe I should reevaluate.
I would love to see a lot of this like automated, just like you have CI tests for new versions of software. Obviously, this is harder for LLM applications, especially complex LLM applications like agents. But yeah, I think there's a lot of room for automating all of this. So hopefully it doesn't take a ton of developer hours, right?
Yeah, Matt, that's why this is called launch sooner. This is about the production.
Yeah, that's what I thought. You have to launch as fast as possible so you don't do any testing. Okay. So Lee, the web stack has changed a lot, since the internet was created. And even, just in the last few years, you can think of language shifts from PHP or whatever to JavaScript. You can think of framework shifts from nothing to Angular to React, Next.js, et cetera. Do you think the same thing is going to happen with LLMs? Like what, with your magic Vercel, detector, where do you think we are in kind of the development of these, systems now?
It's really funny for me personally because I started out doing a lot of Python development and then got really just all in on JavaScript, and I'm still in that world. And now getting deeper into the AI world, it's interesting watching the ML community come from the Python side and the kind of web or AI engineered side come from the JavaScript side, and they're trying to meet somewhere in the middle. And I think you've probably seen this as well too. So the stack is kind of rapidly evolving right now as both sides is trying to figure out which pieces they want to use. Do I do more on the Python side? Do I build with Flask? Or do I call in APIs with some JavaScript clients? And I think really what it comes down to is how you're trying to craft the final product experience. And that's why we spent a lot of time trying to abstract away some of these common patterns like streaming and chat responses, because that's just this core fundamental piece of a great product experience, regardless if I do it in Python or in JavaScript. So if we can give developers a good abstraction for that, that's going to be a key part of their stack. Because at least for right now, there's so many great LLMs, there's so many great databases, there's so many good parts of the stack that all these builders can experiment with or try different tools. But these common base level abstractions, which I'm sure you've seen as well too, it's like you want to have something that saves these developers time, that actually helps them launch faster because they're building more product code. Whether that's more JavaScript code, more Python code, something else in between, I don't know. I'm very biased because I love React, but I think personally from my experience, I've seen a lot of the JavaScript engineers get more into AI because of the tools in the JS ecosystem that are evolving to support some of this.
I've seen the exact same thing. One of the reasons why we decided to invest in our JavaScript library is because we saw just the types of developers who are starting to build with ML, like switch from purely like Python devs to like more like full stack devs. So and that's why we're continuing to invest in our JavaScript library too. So.
And I was going to try to needle you guys if you were big Python people, but like it looks like we're all JavaScript people.
I'd take TypeScript is better.
Okay, so programming languages should not be white space sensitive. This is my like hot take for the day and why I don't think Python is a thing. We can like fight about this later if anybody wants to fight.
I mean, as someone who like works, who like contributes to our Python library and then like sometimes takes that same thing that I contributed to Python and I try to like mirror it to our JavaScript library, it feels like way better in JavaScript.
All right, this is a secret. Don't tell anybody that we all like JavaScript or TypeScript. So we're at a Pinecone conference right now. Pinecone is really good at retrieval in sort of LLM workflows and pipelines. There's also this idea of fine-tuning, right, which is a little bit of the more traditional idea of kind of using training to augment the knowledge that comes built into my model. Do you guys have a perspective on like, is one of these patterns going to be dominant over time? Do they both have a place in kind of production grade apps? Because I think there's sort of a strong argument either side. I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what I'm seeing in production right now is a lot more of the RAG, search and retrieval type of workflows. There is a place for fine tuning. I'll tell you what I've seen customers do. When they start to build, so I'll give you an example. There's a company out there, you guys have probably heard of it, Personal.ai. They build you a personal LLM that acts as like your chatbot. And in that scenario where they're learning they actually fine tune the LLM based off of you once they've collected a large enough corpus of data about you. But until then, general things like conversational, and I'm sure a lot of chatbots do this, are a lot of things that you can actually retrieve and then go put back into the prompt. And so if you ask me to make a bet right now, I'd say 90-10. Most people will probably be able to hit their use case with search and retrieval. I think there's a few set of use cases where you might fine tune. That's my hot take. What do you guys think?
I tend to agree with that. I think, it depends on the type of application that you're building. I think that I would like to see LM applications become more personalized to the user, like the specific type of user. And it's, if you have a channel to collect user feedback, to know like what the user preferences are, and offer responses specific to those user preferences. I think it's a lot easier to do that with some type of prompting mechanism than fine-tune a model for every user, right? So it's for that, for sure. I think I more or less agree.
The ROI, the level of complexity to how much accuracy you're going, the trade-off that you make there, so much lower lift to start with the retrieval than it is to immediately jump to something like fine-tuning. And so I think that's something I have been seeing.
I kind of feel like this also goes back to the earlier conversation about demos and whether they actually get into production, because the chat experience, the search and retrieval experience feels, at least from what I've seen, exponentially easier to actually get into production than deploying like an agent type application that actually works really well. In production, it's quite a bit harder. So yeah.
Yeah, the one nuance there I might say is I have been seeing like assistance as a use case is really interesting, because I feel like we've all seen chatbots and that, chat over your docs type of experience. But with assistance, you have this ability to, it could be more personalized to your domain. So medical assistance, legal assistance, et cetera. And that, I think we're just starting to see that kind of pop off. And that is an interesting space where fine tuning might be more common. And for large companies, I don't know, I think one pattern I've been seeing with larger organizations is that, especially with these type of assistants, there might be more internal assistants. Like, it helps there are more employees than necessarily external facing assistants because of the privacy constraints.
So if I've just launched my Twitter demo, or if I've just shown my first version of an internal tool, I probably don't need to worry about fine-tuning yet. It sounds like it's sort of the consensus. Okay. Can you guys each share your favorite example of like an AI app that you actually use and like actually sort of operates at scale? Maybe Lee, starting with you.
So one that I had been using quite a bit, it's now built into some of the LLMs, but is PDF.ai. So it's classic like chat with your PDF, but really interesting that you can also, once you give it some prompt and it pulls back some information, it like highlights the specific part of the PDF that it, if it's a 200-page PDF, that can be super helpful as well too. I use that quite a bit, and then I was just messing with Claude, and you can upload PDFs as well in there too. So that's one that I've used I liked.
I'll give a couple of boring answers like ChatGPT and Copilot.
Never heard of it.
kind of changed the way I write code.
What do you use ChatGPT for? Like, what's your number one use case?
Honestly, like I asked it a lot of like coding, general like design questions. It's not always great, but I'm actually surprised at like some of the responses it gives. Like, especially like if I'm working with a tool that I'm not as familiar with, like like Terraform or something like that, and I need some quick help. It's really quite good. I think if I'm doing anything like complicated in Python involving like async IO or something like that, or like debugging a race condition, it's not as helpful, but yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, similar boring, I'd say ChatGPT, Copilot. The one shameless plug I'll put is we've actually integrated an LLM into our own product for data analysis. And that's been a really, really great way to, I think, just, also integrate into our own product for analysis.
Very cool. Okay, we've got 2 votes for ChatGPT. Controversial.
That's also the way that I use ChatGPT is I dump in a TypeScript error. I'm like, just fix this. It's like, I don't know what's going on here. Just fix it for me.
And then maybe just last question on sort of the practical side. What do you see break most often when people are trying to put apps into prod? Like what, out of the various components that people have to deploy, and sometimes it's kind of a bunch of different things. Sometimes it's all kind of all in one. What do you typically see breaks first that people should kind of watch out for?
I wouldn't know if I would characterize this as breaking, but when people try to build with agents, like you can run into this infinite loop problem that I described earlier. I also think that a lot of applications kind of depend on the format of the completion being in a very specific format like JSON or CSV or something, and then parsing that. People can get issues there as well. So I think it's important, if this is critical to your application, to have some type of retry mechanism where you can like surface the error back to the LLM and say like, this wasn't actually JSON, valid JSON, couldn't like try again. So,
Aparna, what do you think?
I think with, maybe because we're at a Pinecone event, with search and retrieval, I think there's things related to chunking strategies that I see. If there's context is too large, where you put the context in the prompt matters.
Oh, meaning it may work when you're in development because you have a relatively small sort of quote training set, but then once you get into production, chunking or whatever sort of breaks down.
Yeah, and then is the retrieve context the right retrieve context? And a lot of applications, like one popular framework out there, Llama Index, for instance, I think re-ranks a lot of if you're using their tool. And so I think just retrieving something and then plugging it into a chatbot isn't as simple. I've seen a lot actually break in that experience when going into production.
I think for me, I think just due to the nature of how popular AI is right now, like most things that people are trying to put into production, it's gonna get a lot of traffic. So very commonly I see the infrastructure that they're deploying to, it's not going to scale. So they ran out of memory, or they needed to spin up 10 more servers and they didn't auto scale or something. That's a common failure point. Another is due to the traffic and potential malicious use as well too. They don't have kind of bot protection or abuse mechanisms put in place to prevent, and then they have a bunch of people trying to scrape content or just generally take advantage if they have a free tier. And then the third one that I've seen where people sometimes make mistakes is building the chat-like experience is actually kind of deceptively hard to do well, to get the right user experience, especially when you're dealing with streaming in content from an LLM, and especially when you're trying to maximize, you want to use the least amount of tokens as possible. There's some little intricacies that we found when we were building the AI SDK that from Vercel, is to like try to abstract this away a little bit to make it as easy as possible to not have to, that's a solved problem now, right? It's like, I don't want to have to do that again.
Okay, lightning round. I have one final question for each of you, and one-word answers. And this was not prepped, by the way. Lee, will AI kill us all?
No.
Great. Ankush, Elon or Zuck, who are you taking?
As a former Facebooker, I have to say Zuck.
You're not, you're no longer a Facebook employee, but okay, Zuck, we got it. Aparna, were you or were you not a contestant on The Amazing Race?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Here you have it. AI is not going to kill us all. Zuck is going to win, and Aparna was on The Amazing Race, so maybe ask her about that later. Awesome. I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you.
Okay, so what are your thoughts about testing in production? I know that there was a conversation about trying to get things prepared as quickly as you can, but when you're working on going from an idea to a working product, are there any identifiers that you see as something that you feel like is ready to go to production, but still might feel a little immature?
So just repeating the question, it's just, what does testing look like?
Yeah, what are some identifiers that you feel like is a place where you can deploy something to production, but also know that there's more work to be done, and how can you test in production in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think this is a fun one because it kind of comes back to what ML 1.0 did in the beginning, which is you got to collect. You got to know how to evaluate a model. And it could be, in the past, maybe there's things like if, you eventually collected some type of ground truth and it came back. I think in the LLM applications, the most common thing I've seen is user feedback. So being able to collect, if it's a chatbot application, is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Is it engagement? Is it that people actually accept the suggestions if it's content generation? Are you saving some type of real person going in and answering the question because of the chatbot that you built? And so typically collecting that type of user feedback, I say, is not going to happen until you've rolled it out into the real world. And so that's a big one that I think folks are actually starting to think about, that, how do I collect that human feedback as part of the application layer? Yeah, I don't know if you guys have anything else to add.
Yeah, we can do this. There's been a lot of questions about picking an embedding model. Can any of you dive into how you're evaluating these models and identifying which one might be right for your use case?
Yeah, I mean, I can take a high-level stab at this. I think it comes back down to evals as well. So yeah, I mean, there are tons of embedding models to choose from. LangChain has a lot of wrappers around a bunch of different embedding models. I think, yeah, you kind of have to experiment.
I'd say the one thing I've been seeing people do is where are you using these embeddings? You're using them in the retrieval itself. So when you're using it in the retrieval, is it actually finding the most relevant content from your knowledge base to be able to use in the response, or is it picking something that's kind of relevant but not that great? And so you could, you could take the totally user-centric approach where you try different user models and then you can, at the end of the day, go back to user feedback. You could also use things like ranking metrics to come back and understand which embedding models are picking the right documents and in what order and what relevance, and then use that to kind of stack rank the embeddings itself. And then ultimately you could use things like, I think there's components of just the retrieval itself, of was there gaps in the knowledge base or not, that you can try to understand from the embedding space to troubleshoot it.
Yep. And yeah, I guess like something to add to that too, I think if you have a lot of domain-specific data, like maybe off-the-shelf embedding models like won't work quite well. So yeah, might have to strategize accordingly.
This is actually something we've tested internally at A16Z too, and the only like takeaway is test different models on your own data. Like you can read all the blog posts about like pros and cons, whatever, ADA versus sentence transformers, whatever, and like until you try it on your own data, like basically none of it applies. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Ankush.
Same for vector databases too, by the way. Getting your own data in there is important. Okay, we have one more question before the next presenter. Is what's the largest missing piece of the generative AI stack right now in your mind?
The question is, what's the largest missing piece in the generative AI stack? I think I've written at least 3 papers about the generative AI stack so far, but I don't know the answer to this question, so I need you guys to...
I don't know if it's a missing piece, but it's hard to do today. It was something I was talking to Jared Palmer about, who gave a talk earlier. When you're sending back some kind of chat response, it's great if you could include kind of interactive widgets in that experience as well too. You want to have components. You want to have different ways for your customer to interact with the data that you've retrieved, and I guess in a lot of ways make it easier for them to do the right thing. If it's free-form text, sometimes it might go well, it might not go well, but if you give them like 3 buttons you can click and if there's like a nice card of the product you're trying to sell, it's probably going to be a little easier to get a good result. And I think actually building that experience is not as easy as it could be today. So I don't know exactly what tool will materialize for that, but I think that's a product experience that could be easier to build.
Yeah, I would say my answer, I guess a bit like tailored to this talk, is it's really hard to tell if like new versions of your LLM application are going to perform better out in the real world compared to an old version. So just getting confidence on new versions of your application, I think it's hard to tell right now.
Great.
I do have one, which is an open source LLM that's actually competitive with GPT-4. I think that would be by far the biggest game changer, and I think we're going to see it like relatively soon.
All right, another round of applause for our panel.
All right, thank you, everyone.